Good evening and welcome to the Candidate 101 information session. It's great to see such a positive interest in municipal government. I do see some familiar faces this evening. For those that I haven't met, my name's John Kennedy. I'm the City Clerk for the City of Peterborough. This evening's session is a joint venture with our colleagues from the Townships. So I'm just going to take a moment to introduce them. So if you haven't already met them, you know who they are as well. From Dummer Township, we have the Clerk and Deputy CAO, Martina Chatt-Hartwick. Is Martina here? Way up at the back. Looks like a clerk's row up there. Yeah. From the Township of Selwyn, we have Angela Chittick, Manager of Community and Corporate Services, and the clerk. Angela. And Tanya Gonclaves is the deputy clerk. From Cavan Monaghan, we have the clerk, Cindy Page. Cindy. From Trent Lakes, we have the clerk, Jessie Clark. Jessie. And Deputy Clerk Bianca Dragsevic. Bianca. From North Kawartha, the Deputy Chief Administrative Officer Jason Post. Jason Post. And Deputy Returning Officer Keely Ann Johnson. Thanks, Keely. From Havelock Belmont Methuen, the Chief Administrative Officer and Municipal Clerk Bob Angione. And the acting Deputy Clerk, Leah Hutton. From Otonabee South Monaghan, the Chief Administrative Officer and Clerk is Heather Scott. Thanks, Heather. And Deputy Clerk is Liz Ross. From Asphodel Norwood, we have the Clerk is Melanie Hudson. Thanks, Melanie. And from the City of Peterborough, we have Deputy Clerk Natalie Garnett to my right. Election Supervisor Vicki King. And Elections Assistant Chris Cordy. Chris maybe, I think she's working the table. So, yeah. So thank you to my colleagues for being here this evening and for your assistance. I also want to take a moment to thank the Market Hall team for facilitating tonight and for recording this session. It will be posted to the city's YouTube channel. The Township of Cavan Monaghan will be hosting an additional information session for candidates and third-party advertisers. That'll be held next week, next Wednesday, April 8th, 6 p.m. at the Cavan Monaghan Community Center. So you can register online through the Township website to attend that. The Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing will make the presentation, and that again is for candidates and third-party advertisers. So it's another opportunity to get very timely and pertinent information. We have had some inquiries about nomination forms for candidates in the City of Peterborough. It's our understanding that the province will be issuing the 2026 version of the nomination forms very shortly. So once we have those, we will be able to produce the candidate packages. So you can stay tuned through our website for that information. Just before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. Washrooms, as you may know, are located in the lobby. And if for some reason we need to exit the building quickly, you can do so through the lobby and also to the rear of the stage here. So as advertised, tonight is an opportunity to learn more about local government, roles and responsibilities. The session is anticipated to end by 9 p.m. And if there's time, we'll entertain questions as well. So, our keynote speaker this evening is Nigel Bellchamber. Nigel has held a variety of municipal offices in both two-tier and single-tier systems, rural and urban, including clerk, treasurer, commissioner of finance and administration, and chief administrative officer. Since 2001, His firm, Nigel Bellchamber and Associates, has consulted with numerous municipalities, local boards, and provincial organizations on topics including organizational review, asset management, strategic planning, senior staff recruitment, governance, and financial management. Nigel is a member of the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, Councillor Education and Training team involved in developing and facilitating its effective municipal councillor program, as well as its Municipal Act 2001 sessions. Nigel holds diplomas in Honours Business Administration and in local government from the University of Western Ontario, and enjoys continued involvement with local government officials and processes that spans over 30 years. He's a member of the Public Sector Accounting Board, which sets accounting standards for Canadian governmental organizations. So we're very excited to have Nigel here this evening to impart his knowledge and wisdom on local government. So please give a warm welcome for Nigel.
Thank you very much, John. I have to let you know I didn't write that introduction. I don't know where you got it from, John. It's a little longer, but it almost sounds like I couldn't keep a job, given the number of jobs, or couldn't focus on the kind of work that I do. Maybe there's something to that. Anyway, I have been working in municipal government in the field since, well, I won't tell you how long it is, but it's been multiple decades. And I continue to enjoy it. That's why I'm here today. I enjoy working with municipal staff and the people who put themselves out to run for elected office and, in fact, put themselves out and put their families out as well. Because it's not just a sole venture, it's a full team adventure if somebody is elected to a municipal council. Before I talk about some of the different things we're going to cover, I want to talk about really Municipal Government 101. What's it all about? I'm going to touch on powers, accountability and transparency, roles and responsibilities that include staff, elected officials, heads of council, and others in the public, what the personal responsibilities are for people who are elected to municipal positions. Because there are some very important personal responsibilities and personal exposures that people need to know about. We're going to talk about municipal codes of conduct. Those get in the news from time to time. It's all over Ontario, this is happening. And there's going to be some changes to that as well. We're just not sure what. And then I'm going to talk about a little bit about municipal conflict of interest, because it's a legal thing, and I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to give anybody any kind of legal advice or pretend to interpret that, but I can relay you to some expertise on that. So I'm going to cover a pretty wide range. Now, I'm going to make you work for a minute, and I know that we're being taped up there for broadcast on YouTube later, so if I repeat what you say to me, then it's because I want to make sure that people who are watching on YouTube can hear later on. But what are some of the services that local government performs in your community? Just shout one out. Transit. Okay, transit. In your community, transit is just, what we call regular transit, or does it include paratransit or specialized transit? Paratransit as well? Yeah. And I was in Toronto earlier today. We've got it above ground, we've got it below ground, we've got streetcars, we've got multiple different kinds of transit. That's one, okay? How's another service? Roads. That's a really big topic. The conference I was speaking at today in Toronto was the Ontario Good Roads Association. There were something like 150 suppliers exhibiting their services there. And when you think about roads, most of the time we just think about the top, the part that we're on. But if you ever saw a cross-section of a road and what it's composed of and what's buried in it, or what finds its way into it as a pathway, it's quite amazing. And even that top surface, what do we do with it in the winter? We, quote, maintain it, right? And we maintain it in a number of different ways. We plow it, we sand it, we salt it. We do all kinds of interesting things to it. Do we actually, in Peterborough County, does anybody pre-wet their roads? No, you're a little colder than we are in southwestern Ontario. We actually have vehicles that go around to areas that are prone to freezing, and actually will pre-wet or we'll put down a chloride solution in order to stop it from black ice from forming. So do some very technical things. And then there's issues of maintenance. Has anybody seen any potholes this spring? Yeah, everywhere I go, potholes are amazing. I was in, many years ago, I was in Portugal, and if anybody's ever been to the south of Portugal, there's an absolutely beautiful highway going right across the south of Portugal. Anybody seen those? They built those for the World Cup so that they could showcase Portugal. We're having the World Cup come to Canada and Toronto this year. I don't think the Gardiner Expressway quite looks that delightful. What else is a service? Whoa, wait, hang on a second. Water and sewer. Let's just go for water, okay? The water that comes out the tap is the end of a very significant process. What's the first thing you do before you can get water out of a tap? Sorry? Okay, I didn't quite follow that, but I mean, the first thing you have to do is you have to source it, right? Where does Peterborough's water come from? From the river, right? That's the source. Even before the river is the source, there is some effort goes in, probably managed by your conservation authority, that's called source water protection. Anybody familiar with that term? That's a process where source water is protected, whether it's groundwater or lake water or river water. And then we source it, right? And what's the first thing that's done? It's treated. It's treated so that it's drinkable. And then it's stored. Got any water towers? Or you got any elevated storage? Or you got any ground storage? Isn't it just pumped out of the river as demand goes, right? We've got some storage. And then we collect it, and then we distribute it. And all the time we measure to make sure that the quality of the water meets the Safe Drinking Water standards. And I'll come back to the Safe Drinking Water Act towards the end of the presentation, because it's really important for those that are on municipal councils and those who are responsible for drinking water delivery. So the tap is turned, and what you don't put in your glass or your kettle or whatever goes down the drain. Then what do you do with it? Somebody, pardon? Well, we actually collect it, right? And then we treat it, and then we dispose of it somewhere. So we actually collect it, treat it, dispose of it, so that the environment's not impacted. So there's this very big loop in terms of water sourcing, treating, distribution, collection of the excess, treating, and discharge. It's a very, very important function. What's another municipal service? What's that? Building permits. Yes, you're required by law, by the province to, are you a chief building official by any chance, or a builder? I'm a realtor. You're a realtor. Okay, you get a sense that it's important. Building permits. Municipalities are required to have a chief building official who issues permits in accordance with the approved building code. Yeah. And time is important, and money is important, right? And that also involves interpretation of the kind of structure, the structural plans people are putting forward, and where they're going to put the structure. So it's not just straight, yep, you're going to build a shed? Okay, goodbye, have a good time, give me my $10. It's not that easy. What's another one? Parks? Okay. Interesting. Parks are one of those areas that are completely discretionary for a municipality. We talked about roads. Once you have a road, you must maintain it forever, unless you stop up and legally close it and dispose of it, which doesn't happen very often. We talked about drinking water. We talked about Once you've got drinking water, you got to maintain it in perpetuity, and sanitary sewers, same thing. Parks are discretionary. Municipalities are not required by law to have the inventory of parks that they do. Some parks you acquire as a result of a subdivision agreement, but in the sense that they're perpetual, not necessarily so. So parks and recreation are the largest discretionary areas that you have. Okay. Parks and recreation, very similar, yeah. Yep. Yeah, nobody in Ontario is required to have a hockey arena. However, anybody ever try to close an arena? It's an amazing process. What's it? Sorry?
We have closed arenas here.
You have closed arenas? Yeah. I've seen them closed, but usually when there was another new one built somewhere, right? So, yeah, last arena I knew that closed in this area was Ops Township, just south of Lindsay. That was one that closed over there. That was some years ago. What else do we do? Garbage. What do you mean garbage? What do you mean garbage? What do we do at the start of the process? We collect it from people, right? We collect it, and then we transport it, and then we find a way of disposing of it. And does Peterborough have its own landfill site? And are there many closed landfills in existence in Peterborough that you're aware of? I bet there may even be half a dozen or more. John, any idea what the number might be of fully closed landfill sites? There's Ministry of Environment also requires that we keep track of those in perpetuity. And many of those date back decades and decades and decades and weren't very large. But landfill's important. It's a gift that keeps on giving because the leachate comes out of it for decades and decades after it's been closed, and it must be monitored for methane. Any leachate comes out must be treated. It's not over when you cover it. What else? Emergency services. So what would you put in that category? What's the first one? Fire. Okay, let's go to fire first. I'm sorry hope I'm not boring you, but fire is about fire prevention. It's about fire education, it's about fire inspection, and then fire suppression, right? And I think in almost all fire services in Ontario, the least amount of activity involves fire suppression, active working fires. Thank goodness, because that means the education and the prevention and the inspection are all working, okay? And that's the objective, is to minimize the number of fires and the loss and the damage from fires. That's one important emergency service. What's another one? What was another one then? Municipal housing. Okay, that's what kind of housing are you thinking about when you say municipal housing? Okay, so this might be municipal housing might involve. We do provide in some cases, we have long-term care homes, which is a form of housing, but with specialized care. And then sometimes we have assisted living places associated with those that are for people who have significant mobility, but would like that higher level of care and have the means to handle it. And then we have social housing. That was something that was devolved from the province about 25 years ago to municipalities. The municipalities were swapped some financial responsibilities, and the deficits from social housing, or what used to be OHC, Ontario Housing Corporation properties, those deficits were matched off between some other financial trade with the province. The problem was municipalities don't have the resources to build new ones as the population grows. And that's an incredible amount of pressure. Similarly, we don't necessarily have easy access to resources for dealing with people who are extremely low income or who have some other kind of disabilities. When I was a student, I spent one summer washing dishes in a psychiatric hospital. That psychiatric hospital is long closed. Most of the people that lived in it, quite frankly, when the place closed, moved into the community, but their needs didn't quite change the same way. So we're dealing with things that 50 years ago were dealt with by provincial governments, and we don't necessarily have the resources to do it. But so that's a good one you brought up. In terms of other housing, there's a big move by the province for municipalities to be encouraging the building of new housing stock, for general public, right? Development of new housing stock. That was part of the announcement by Prime Minister Carney and Premier Ford yesterday, with some scheme that's coming forward to reduce development charges and replace that with some sort of federal provincial funding, as well as GST and PST rebates, reductions or elimination on certain types of housing. So, and municipalities are central to this because you issue the permits, you do the land development in terms of the approvals. So what's another thing?
Tourism and economic development.
Yeah, that's okay. That's another one you don't have to do, right? But again, your business community expects that council will assist in supporting that kind of activity, particularly when you're in a tourist area like Peterborough, where you have a significant component of your economy is tourism related. And also economic development where you've got properties that are changing their use. And I drive through town here today and I see all kinds of properties that are used not with the use that they were built for, they're used for something else. And that's all part of economic development to try and encourage that. Okay, I don't want to take too much of your time doing it. What's another couple? I heard animal control, and I'll come back to that one. What kind of animals? Dogs, okay. How about cats? You don't license cats here in Peterborough? No? I live in London, and maybe 10 years ago, one of my grandsons was doing some accounting work for me in my lower level next to my office. And he looked out the back window and he said, "There's a strange rabbit in the backyard." So we looked out, and sure enough, it was what I'd refer to as a designer rabbit. It had floppy ears, and it was obviously somebody's pet. And we thought, well, we can't have that. It'll get eaten by coyotes or something. So knocked on a couple neighbors' doors. They didn't know the rabbit. Called the animal control people from the city and said, "We have a rabbit here. Will you take it into your charge and hold it until the owner can be found?" And they came to the house. They took the rabbit. They were very kind, and they were in our backyard. My wife was talking to them. And nothing more came of it. About a week later, there was an animal control officer at the door with one of those handhold debit machines like they have in restaurants, you know that. And she said, "We were at your house a week ago with respect to rabbit, right?" "Yes, you were. You have 2 cats. They were out in the backyard with your wife. And we don't have any record of you having cat licenses." So my wife wasn't home. I just laughed and got the credit card. But that was another thing the municipality did in order to keep that. Has anybody talked about hiring a rat czar for Peterborough? No, I don't know where you're going, but that was that laugh. I think Calgary was in the news, talk about hiring a rat czar. They have rat czars in New York, people that rat control. The rat population is quite aggressive, and it's a concern in many urban areas. Anything else? Somebody had another one somewhere. Libraries, of course, libraries. That's an interesting one. The library board is a separate corporation under the Public Libraries Act, and it develops a budget, sends it to council. Members are appointed by council and the board itself, but the council doesn't have to accept that budget. Council can decrease that budget to virtually $1. It's one of the few budgets that gets sent to council from outside boards, like we have boards like conservation authorities and police services boards, where councils don't have the ability to automatically cut that budget and set it at a much lower level. That's an interesting one. So, thank you for that one. I spent some time, I can tell you, this is a Peterborough story. Does anybody know Linda Reed, the former city manager of Peterborough? Some people will know Linda. Anyway, I was working with Linda in London. I was the treasurer and she was a CAO. And Linda, senior management team meeting one Tuesday afternoon, started off by saying, the library board parted company with Reed Menzies, who Reed was the librarian, at its meeting last night. Nobody says anything. The board has asked if one of our senior management team members could fill in as chief executive officer for the library while they recruit a new person. It should be about 6 weeks. It's about time it takes to recruit somebody. And she said, are there any volunteers? And you know what happens when people ask for volunteers? Everybody looks down at their papers at the table and they move them around and don't make eye contact, right? So that was what everybody was doing, except for the city engineer. Any engineers in the crowd? They tend to be a little devious. They're John, the city engineer, he looked up and he said, Linda, he said, the treasurer over there, he looks after the city's books. Isn't that what the libraries do, look after books? And where did this come from? And she looked at me and she said, do you know anything about libraries? I said, well, in a former position, we had a couple of county library boards, so I do know a little bit about that. She said, you're it. That was as simple as that. And 6 weeks turned out to be 6 months of extra duty, but it was a lot of fun. Learned a lot, and we ended up doing some really interesting things with the library board. So it's always an opportunity to do something different. I guess the point I'm trying to make by asking about all these services is that municipalities do an awful lot. Everything from animal control or airports. Does Peterborough have a municipal airport? Okay, airports. Down to zoos. Have you got a municipal zoo? You do, don't you? Yeah. A to Z, you got the full range, A to Z of the alphabet. If you're actually putting together if you're an accountant, you know what I mean when I say chart of accounts, but the list of different accounts you'd have in your general ledger, in a municipal operation, there will be at least 100 different distinctions in terms of services or sub-services that will be offered. And we've talked about 20 of them. We haven't talked about the other 80 that might be there. The point of all of this is, if you're thinking of running for council, because you're really upset about one thing and want to focus on that and that alone, good luck. Because you will have to wade through and participate in the discussion of all of the other business and services and decisions that come before council. And you won't be able to automatically focus on the one thing that you thought you were going to run and fix right away and then relax for the rest of your time. It's a very, very busy, full program. Does anybody, John, do you still present or print council agendas? You do some for people if they need them? What's a typical agenda? Well, let me ask people, what do you think of a typical agenda? How many pages is it? 150? 300? I'm starting to sound like clerks here when you say 300, yeah? It's not a 10-page agenda, that's for sure. It's not unusual to have 300. We would hope to keep it under that. But John, what's a typical number? Do you even worry about the number? John just said they can range from 300 to 600 or 700. And if you've got some very detailed planning work or technical work coming before council, then that's why you'll have that larger agenda because of the accompanying reports. An elected official doesn't have to know everything that's on every page because that's what you hire some technical advice for, but you have to read the covering report and recommendations that go with all those technical reports and do your best to understand those. And you have to be familiar to some degree with the contents of all of your agenda and supporting material. You just can't wing it. You just can't show up in front of council and say, what are we going to do tonight? What's the Peterborough, or what's people typically send? Are your council meetings early in the week? Mondays? Okay, and out in the townships, you Mondays and Tuesdays? Tuesdays? Okay. So agendas go out when? Thursday, the Thursday before? So people have the weekend, they got Friday and Saturday, part of Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, to read them. If you're an elected official, chances are you spend most Sunday nights reading through the material to get ready for the council meeting. I haven't asked the question, how many of you here are currently elected officials in Peterborough, one of the townships? Okay, we got a couple. Is that about right in terms of when you spend your time? Sunday night? How about yourself, sir? Yeah. It's not a 15-minute job, that's for sure. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that. So there's a fair amount of scope in local government. So the powers that councils exercise, where do they come from? Well, municipal councils have no inherent powers of their own. Municipal councils can't say, we think we'd like to establish a Peterborough militia. And why can't they do that? Well, because the province hasn't given them the power to do that. Every power that's exercised by a municipal corporation has to find its roots in provincial law. And the provincial law comes from federal law, from the Canadian Constitution, or what was at one time the British North America Act. It's now the Constitution Act. There's a schedule in there that says these are federal powers, these are provincial powers, and one line on provincial powers says municipal institutions. And that's where all of the legislation regarding school boards, regarding municipalities, regarding conservation authorities, regarding fire departments, regarding police departments, all those things, it all comes from those two words on one schedule in the British North America Act, or the Constitution Act. And it's why scholars have said for years that municipalities are creatures of the province. That's the technical term from the historians. And today, size of municipality doesn't matter. There was a time when villages had certain authority and towns had a little more, and bigger towns a little more, and cities had more, and in upper tiers, counties and regions. Today, size doesn't matter. The same powers, if you're in Northern Ontario, if you're in Kapuskasing, in population 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 now, if you're in Kapuskasing, you've got all the same powers that the City of Peterborough does. And your population is now in the tens of, I don't even know your population, but it's closer to 100 than it is to 10, right? So you have all those same powers. In fact, there are small municipalities in Northern Ontario with populations of 10 or 15 people almost. Coburn Island has 2. It's in Lake Superior, off Manitoulin. It has all the same powers, not that it wants to exercise them. But just give you that sense. That's the way the Act was rewritten some years ago. And the powers, shall be exercised by council. So the power to do anything has to find its roots in authority given by council in a bylaw. Council must exercise powers in bylaws. So we're talking about that issuing a building permit earlier. The provincial building code talks about issuing building permits, but that's a piece of legislation. But your chief building official is appointed by bylaw by the municipality in accordance with that particular piece of legislation. So, and if the municipality doesn't, and it says the municipality shall appoint or shall contract for a qualified person to serve that purpose. But there is a bylaw. In fact, if you're a municipal staff person these days and you want to buy a pencil, although somebody pointed out to me nobody buys pencils anymore. So if you wanted to buy some small item, if you wanted to spend $50 on a clicker, you actually have to find or have to understand that there is a bylaw that's authorized that. And in fact, probably several bylaws authorize that. For instance, there will be a purchasing bylaw that says who can purchase what kind of items to what value. It's not an unusual thing. It'll be that kind of purchasing policy will exist in the private sector as well. But the person who exercises that power will have their authority, their hiring authority, and their appointment authority eventually will be as a result of someone passing a bylaw and hiring or delegating the hiring of that person. And the spending of that money has to be found in the municipal budget, which is adopted by another bylaw. And that municipal budget is adopted by council in accordance with its procedure bylaw for running processes. So the municipal world is all about, or you find its processes in bylaws that have been passed by council. We can get more technical than that, but actually everything that's done has a bylaw somewhere behind it. And that power is exercised by council. So you get to the point where we're dealing with some pretty technical and complex matters. We got any sewer engineers in the crowd? It's pretty complex, pretty technical. If you're running a road system, your airport manager doesn't happen to be in the crowd, that's pretty technical and pretty complex. Very little about municipal government is simple. And council needs to understand that it should have good technical advice available to it from the staff or the sometimes consultants, if you don't have the expertise on staff that it engages to advise it. It's a very awkward thing for a council to assume that members of council can provide technical advice. That sometimes you'll have someone on a council who has significant technical expertise, but you'll often find that for professional reasons, they will not provide technical advice because of exposure, legal exposure. So that's another thing. And you aren't always going to have that kind of skill on council. So you need to understand you need that from a staff point of view. So if council's exercising these powers, when does it do it? Well, it has to do it in what we refer to as a duly constituted meeting. Councils can only act in meetings in accordance with legislation, and duly constituted refers, in my mind, to about half a dozen different things. First of all, the public has to know that the meeting is going to take place. So there's notice given of every municipal meeting. Occasionally, there may be a provision for an emergency meeting with a reduced notice, but there would be very specific circumstances like a flood or some other related matter that would permit that to occur. So that's number one, notice to the public. Why? Because the public has the right to observe. The public doesn't necessarily have the right to participate, but they have the right to observe. Supreme Court of Canada has said that. Second thing is there has to be a quorum of council present. So what's quorum? Number of people present? Not quite. Majority. Anybody else old enough to have studied Latin in school? We're kind of, okay, we got some. You studied Europe, boy, or young person, yeah. Robert's rules. Robert's rules are an interesting thing. We'll come back to them in a minute. Quorum is a majority of the members. So how many, there are some councils that have 5 members. So what's quorum? 3. And if you've got 3 members of council present at a meeting that had notice given, how many have to vote in favor of something for it to pass? Well, no, forget the strong mayor, because it's a 5-member council, and there are no strong mayors on 5-member councils. Gotcha. Yes, yeah. It's only 2. Only 2. The majority of the members present and voting to form a quorum. Right. So that's a wrinkle. You really want to be cautious about that, but that quorum can conduct business. And why do we know this? Because the municipal access, so provincial legislation tells us this. Besides provincial legislation, all the meetings will be governed by a municipal procedure bylaw, which will be a reasonably lengthy document that talks about procedures, and it'll have a default to some other procedural reference document that might be, I think I heard somebody say Robert's Rules of Order, where your procedure bylaw is silent, or doesn't cover an issue, or it might be Bourneau, or it might be Duchesne. I think those are the 3 main ones that we use in Ontario. What do you use as your default, John? Roberts, okay. Has anybody ever read Robert's Rules of Order? The whole thing, like this thick version or the short version? I've got both. It's probably one of those most boring. You'll end up with ink on your nose after you fall asleep if you're reading Robert's Rules of Order. Yeah. Most organizations do. Anybody know who Robert was? Oh, good. He was an American brigadier general who'd served in the Civil War. And as a young man, he came home and he thought he'd get involved in community work, and he joined a church organization. The church group was having a meeting, and they were so confused about process and rules that he didn't know, and he was embarrassed, so he took it upon himself to write a guide for meeting procedures. This is where Robert's Rules of Order came from. And he captured them part from the Congress and the House of Representatives of the US, which has its roots in Westminster parliamentary tradition. But they have become the de facto or the default guide. And interesting, the rights to them is still owned by one of his descendants. I think it's a great-grandchild that actually owns them. So, but I would encourage you, if you're going to buy Robert's Rules of Order, buy the short version. It'll tell you virtually everything you need to know. And if you're a member of council and really want to get technical, talk to John. Talk to one of the other clerks. Because they tend to know whether or not this is something that's in municipal law that you need to know about before you default to the Robert's Rules. Now, if there's a vote takes place, all members are required to vote. If somebody abstains and says, I don't want to vote, there's 5, and it's, again, a 5-person council. Somebody says, I just don't want to vote, I'm going to abstain. What's that mean? It's considered a no, in effect. It's considered a no. So the other 4 vote in favor. Turns out it's 4-1, in effect. It's 4-1. So it doesn't have any significant meaning in that way. There is a procedure whereby another member of council can call for a recorded vote. And at that point, people are required to record, the clerk's required to record the names and the vote of each member present. Council can also delegate authority. Let's go back to buy the pencil. All right. If they don't delegate the authority in either a position description or organization chart or some sort of delegation bylaw, then nobody has the authority to do anything other than council. And certainly council shouldn't be out there buying pencils. Not a good use of their time. So what makes municipal government accountable and transparent? Because that was a really, really important component when municipal legislation was rewritten at the turn of the century. I guess we can say that, turn of the century, around the year 2000, that period. Open meetings were at the root of it, at the heart of it. That's number one. There is occasion when it is appropriate for a municipality to exclude the public from its meetings because the subject matter meets one of the conditions set out by the province, and it would be inappropriate to have that initial discussion in a public setting because it could harm the interests of the corporation or of an individual, for instance. So that could be the thing. But the province also set aside a process whereby councils that are thought to have abused this closed meeting privilege and would be investigated with a complaint-driven process. So it's not something that municipalities take lightly. No longer do municipalities close for property, personnel, and legal matters. That was 1980s and 90s. Now it's much more sophisticated than that. It might be personal matters about an identifiable individual, or it might be a matter with respect to acquisition or disposition of land. It's another one that's found in legislation. So you get that kind of legal detail. Council also has to have a significant number of policies so that the public can see what is council's policy on all of this. We've talked about notice of meetings. If you want to attend a council meeting, you want to know when it's going to be published, when the schedule is going to be published. Is it going to be published annually? What about a schedule for a special meeting that's called by council in between its regularly scheduled meetings? Where do you find that? It's got to be in a consistent manner, in a consistent place, and that's what the policy is for, to do that. It puts some discipline on it that, quite frankly, wasn't there 30 years ago. We talked about the purchasing bylaw. Oh yeah, if council wants to sell, give away, rent, lease a piece of property or a building on a piece of property, it has to have a policy as to how it does that. So it's transparent. So it doesn't have a new process for a deal every time something comes up. There has to be some discipline involved with it. It makes good common sense, but again, these are relatively new in the scheme of things, given municipalities have been around for, now we're looking at, can't do my math anymore, over 150 years in Ontario in their current form. There's policies on accountability and transparency. You must have a policy on harassment. This is on occupational health and safety. A workplace harassment and violence prevention policy must be in place. A council member, individual member of staff relations policy as to how people interact, what's appropriate or not. And even things like a pregnancy and parental leave for members of council. This is just a smattering of the policies that need to be in place. But municipalities are process and policy driven. It may seem bureaucratic, but it's for the protection of the ratepayers. It's for the protection of all of the people that the municipality engages, so that it's predictable and accountable. So I said before, all these roles are set by provincial statute, and they talk differently about the council, the head of council, and staff. And I'll come to strong mayor powers in a minute, because that's the, what's the word? I won't even say what it is. But the strong mayor powers is controversial. How's that? So what's the role of council? Well, I talked about council. It's the one that exercises the corporate powers. It represents the public. it's required to consider the well-being and interests of the municipality. And the municipality includes the geographic area, includes the inhabitants of that geographic area, and the municipal corporation, which is the ongoing entity that delivers services. So it has to actually consider all of those things. And we've talked about this now 3 times. Council has to act collectively, in public with notice. Interestingly, if you look at legislation, it doesn't give any management role for council. And I think that's the appropriate, omission's not right, it's a deliberate omission by the province. So council doesn't, or particularly individual councillors, don't go around checking out the park to see if the grass is cut as short as it should be. Those sorts of things. That's not a role. You hire people, you set policies, you set standards, and management is responsible for ensuring that those standards are met. And reporting back to council, so council then can evaluate its policies and determine whether or not its policies have been met. Now, we'll get to the strong mayor powers in a minute, but individual members of council or mayors without strong mayor powers have no particular authority for any service or any decision. In fact, municipal legislation doesn't even call the head of council a reeve, a mayor, or a warden anymore. It just calls them head of council. And council can call their head of council anything they like, as long as they pass a bylaw to do it. I always thought if I were going to be a councillor, I'd want to be called the Grand Duke. And I thought, do you ever remember that? There was a movie years ago called The Mouse That Roared. Peter Sellers was in it, and he was the Grand Duke of Fredonia. That was his. Yeah, I always thought that was lovely. But generally speaking now, heads of council are called mayors. The public understands the term mayor, so it only makes sense. The province gave heads of council in 2001 several duties. One was to preside over the council meetings so that the business can be carried out efficiently and effectively. That's the wording that's in the Act. So that meant they had to be prepared. They had to know what's on the agenda. They had to understand it. They also had to have some sense of where the political wind was blowing so that they can conduct the meeting. Someone once said his job at a council meeting was the same as a conductor of an orchestra. And if he did it right, he did it with a light hand. That was head of council in one city in Ontario. Provides leadership to council. So what's that mean? Does that mean telling councillors what to do? No, I don't think so at all. It's behaving in a way that people respect and look up to. I think that's what leaders do. Although I was looking at TV earlier on, and I'm not sure, but then we'll go somewhere else on that one. Speaks on behalf of the municipality. Head of council is required to be the spokesperson of the municipality. And that's a little different than a member of council. So if you're a head of council and you were, big debate on backyard chickens. You ever had that in Peterborough? A lot of places have that one. Backyard chickens. And the vote was, let's go, 6-1, and the head of council was the only one who voted in a particular direction. So the press comes up afterwards and says to the head of council, well, I guess you lost that one, Mayor. What do you think? Now, there's an obligation on a head of council to say, what's the effect of it? You saw how I voted, so there's no surprise there. However, this is a democratic government. The majority voted in this particular way for this particular result, and that's the way that the corporation's going, and we're moving on. We've got lots of other issues to deal with. That's the role the head of council should take. That's leadership. Member of council, on the other hand, if it was 6-1, it's just a member of council, and the press does the same thing with a microphone, that member of council is somewhat free to say, or isn't bound to say anything other than, well, you saw how I voted, and might even say something like, And if I get a chance to come back on another occasion and try to convince my colleagues again, I'll try it again. Okay, I'm very passionate about this. I'll try and do it again. Maybe really bad politics, but they don't have that same obligation that the head of council does to support the decision of the majority of council. And then there's a couple of sections that were put in by the province as a result of 2 judicial inquiries. There's a judicial inquiry in Toronto into computer leasing, and another one in Waterloo into something called Rim Park financing. And in both of those cases, municipalities got caught out with bad advice, bad technical advice from staff in these occasions, but regarding financing, and it was in the tens of millions of dollars. And Madam Justice Bellamy, who presided over the Toronto computer leasing inquiry, said that, listen, I think municipalities should have, under the duties of the head of council, a responsibility to bring forward to council information and recommendations on administrative and controllership policies, practices, and procedures, and accountability and transparency. And you go, whoops. Anybody got a definition of what controllership practices are? If you look it up, it says it's what controllers do. But basically what it means, controllership practices, are the accounting practices and controls within a municipality to prevent fraud, to prevent theft, and to ensure that the proper advice is taken. It's the sort of information that an external auditor might provide or an auditor general might provide to the provincial or federal government. It's relatively technical advice. Some of it might come from a municipal solicitor, some might come from some other expertise. We don't elect people as heads of council because they're accountants or procurement experts or financing experts. We elect them for other reasons, quite frankly, representative reasons. So a head of council has a duty to make sure this kind of information comes forward and going to work with the chief administrative officer to make sure it comes forward to council. That's the best practice on that. So the legislation also says, the act says that the head of council is the chief executive officer. Well, wait a minute, what confusion is that? Because in the private sector, anybody work in the private sector where there's a chief executive officer of your business? Of course. And that person is probably the person who is in charge and everybody's responsible and reports to that person. And they report to the board of directors. They're the top manager. Well, that's not the role of a head of council in municipal government. Now, for some reason, the province left it in, but in leaving it in, they also defined it. So they said, in acting as the CEO, he or she is not the chief administrative officer, and they don't have any day-to-day management responsibilities. In fact, the CEO role, if you look in the act, I won't bore you with the details, but head of council is in effect a champion or cheerleader for the municipal corporation and for the community. That's the CEO role that they give. Now, except this is the elephant in the room, right? Yeah. So the province now has designated heads of council for lower tier and single tier municipalities where there are 6 or more councillors as a strong mayor. And there are things that they may do, and there are things that they shall do. It's interesting, may and shall are important words in provincial legislation because when they're giving authority, they will use words like may and shall. Those 2 words are important. They don't say can, they say may or shall. So, may choose to hire or fire the CAO and division heads, but that doesn't include statutory officers. What's a statutory officer? Well, the clerk is a statutory officer. The chief building official is a statutory officer. The treasurer is a statutory officer. These are people where there's legislation that says a municipality shall appoint a treasurer, the municipality shall appoint a clerk, those things. Public works directors aren't statutory officers. Directors of IT aren't statutory officers. If you have an organizational structure that has statutory officers reporting to commissioners or general managers who then report to CAO, those commissioners and general managers are not statutory officers. So a head of council who is a strong mayor may choose to hire and or fire those people. And in fact, organize the municipal structure. That's one thing. We haven't seen a lot of it, but if you're a student of municipal government, if you're a student of municipal government, you will maybe have seen that the day after he received strong mayor powers, the mayor of Aurelia dismissed the CAO who was to take office, having been hired by council the next day. Fired him the day before he was to start, and appointed someone else to be CAO. He wasn't successful in the battle at council. He didn't get his way at council, but once he had strong mayor powers, he did that. And that's not gone unnoticed in many jurisdictions. And there's a consequence of that you might not automatically register with you. And basically what it is if your employment is at the whim of an elected official, and elected officials change from time to time, and sometimes they change their minds about things, then your employment contract is going to be different than it was before strong mayor powers. It's going to start to look like what you might see in the private sector, with termination without cause clauses in it that come into play if someone is dismissed without cause. And without cause means fired without a reason, without a justified reason. And that will happen with the senior management team as well. So it filters throughout the organization. It doesn't necessarily cost you extra money right up front, but it might cost extra money later on. But it changes the nature of the employment relationship. And for good reason. There's some protection that people had, some security that they had disappeared. Strong mayor can also direct staff to research and present reports and bylaws that need less than a majority of the members of council to be passed in certain regulated areas designated by the province. That includes housing and infrastructure. And there's no legal definition I'm aware of yet that actually has some barriers on or boundaries on infrastructure and on housing. There may be some opinions, but there's certainly no jurisprudence, no court cases I've seen. So that's another interesting thing. So it changes that dynamic. Now, with the exception of Ottawa and Toronto, no one was elected this term with strong mayor powers. They were granted afterwards. So we're going to have an election, and there's going to be people who run, perhaps, with the idea that, I really like the idea of exercising strong mayor powers. If that's the case, that also changes, to some degree, the dynamic that councillors face as well, because it will potentially limit the ability of council to pass bylaws or certain subject matters if they're not supported by the head of council. I won't go into the details, but there's the ability to veto some of these. If you're really interested in it, look at Timmins. Budget was presented, we'll come to the budget part, because the mayor must present the budget before February 1st. That's a late date in my opinion, but mayor must present the budget if they have strong mayor powers. Those mayors may consult with council. They may go through the same kind of consultative process that you had in place before there were strong mayor powers, or it might be just the mayor does the work with staff and brings in a strong mayor budget. And then council has the ability to amend that budget, but if they do, it can be overridden by the strong mayor with less than a majority of council voting to support them. In order to override that veto, you need a supermajority of council. And this actually happened in Timmins this year. So if you have any interest in this, go to Timmins and on the web and look and see what happened. And it was, bless their hearts, the amendment to the budget was to add some additional topsoil or other material to soccer fields and another half a dozen pickleball courts. The pickleball is a big deal everywhere in the province. Right? I know that. I know that. And that was what it was. And in fact, the mayor vetoed that. After council amended it, council overrode her veto. And then, so now the budget was passed with additional pickleball and additional soccer field treatment. And the members of council who overrode that veto said, oh, now we have to worry about how we can get tax rate back down. To which they were advised by their lawyer, no, you passed the budget when you did that particular veto. You now have a higher tax rate than was originally proposed. They went, oh, it hadn't followed through the details. So it's an interesting situation. I think one of the things that is of concern is if people actually run with a strong intention, an announced intention to exercise strong mayor powers for whatever reason that they believe is appropriate, that will change the dynamic of an election campaign for sure. So let's get away from elected officials and talk about the role of staff. Okay? And there'll be time for some questions at the end of this. And the reason I'm moving without inviting too many questions is because it's being recorded. And when we do have questions at the end, we actually need people to use the microphone so the recording can actually hear the questions as well as the answers. So that's why I'm doing that. So what about the staff's role? Well, it's pretty straightforward, quite frankly. Key element of staff performance is to undertake research and provide advice to council. An issue arises. Whose job is it to provide the technical research and provide advice to council? Sure, individual members of council may look into an issue, but you really rely on your technical staff. And you hire professionals in virtually every department in order to provide their best advice. Council doesn't have to accept that advice. Council may choose to do something else, and staff have an obligation then to implement council's decisions. However, they are obliged to implement with a form of measurement so that council can then evaluate the quality of its decision and the implementation of that decision. Okay? So evaluation is important, not just go away and make it happen. It's a case of go away and measure it and report back. And that way, council can evaluate. One author, several decades ago, wrote an interesting book in the States. And his little reference was, it's council's job to steer the boat and the staff's job to row. That's the difference. Probably still available in some libraries. I happen to have a couple of copies hanging around. So in terms of governance, who are key supports for council? Well, obviously, as I just said, staff, but there are also committees of council. Committees that may be discretionary committees where council appoints some of its members to deal with a particular task and report back, or it may have some advisory committees from the public, or it may with just members of the public, or it may have a mixture. So there's a variety of that. And committee advice is often important as well. And staff will participate with those committees, obviously. Sometimes you hear from the public, either in terms of a delegation into council. You have a formal process for people to delegate or appear before council or committee to provide advice. And the other thing is, if you're an elected official, you'll hear from the public. Probably about 10 o'clock Saturday night, after they got up enough courage, people will phone you. Anybody ever had a phone call like that? That can happen. I heard somebody chuckle, but that happens with municipal councillors. There are things called local boards. They have a status that's different from a committee in that they probably have they're probably a separate corporate entity on their own, like a business improvement area. You probably have at least one BIA, maybe you have more than one BIA. That's a business improvement area funded by the participating businesses. That's one example. Conservation authorities are local boards that provide services to and with municipalities, and that's in a state of change. But whether we're dealing with local boards or committees or council, they conduct their business in public meetings that are open to the public with advance notice. And if you're going to be an elected official, you're going to have to love meetings. Okay? If you hate meetings, think hard about whether or not you really this is the role for you. If this is the role for you. I added up the number of meetings that I went to in my municipal career, and it was well over 1,000 committee and council meetings. And it, quite frankly, John, doesn't take much to get to that number over a period of years. And some of the other staff here will know that. So 1,000 different meetings. You have to appreciate the process, you have to respect the process, and you have to understand the process. The procedure bylaw is an important document. I keep coming back to that. So you need to ask the question, if you're elected, how's it going to change your life? Because it will change your life. People will see you differently the day after you're elected. Partly because they perceive that you personally have some individual power that you didn't have, whereby you can affect their life in a regulatory way or a property way or something else. They believe that as a counselor, you have this power outside of council. That's one way. And that might be your brother or sister or neighbor or whatever that give you a nudge and, oh, you're pretty important now. That can happen. Sometimes that's hurtful. It's painful. You go, why are they doing that to me? If anybody had women who've been, or men or women or people who are elected to council say, I have a hard time going to the supermarket because people stop me and ask me questions and give me advice when I'm out in public or if I'm at the arena or somewhere else. You have to expect that is going to happen. The other thing is people send messages home through your kids. If you have kids, you'll get this situation where someone will tell their child, and they will then talk to your child at high school and say, look, my mom said for you to tell your dad that so-and-so and so-and-so needs attention. And you chuckle, but that happens. Kids, if you have teenage kids and you're running for council, one of the best things you can do is give them a bunch of your business cards if you're on council and say, look, here's dad's business card or mom's business card. Here's their number, their email, their text. Get in touch with them directly because, you know, if I pass the story along, if you pass it to me and I pass it to them, it's a game of broken telephone. So you're better off to go directly. And that's not bad advice at all. And in fact, every elected official's business card, beside having their name and contact information on the front, should be printed on the other side. And it should be the key telephone or website numbers that the public should use if they're trying to access municipal services. Because often, if there's a public works issue, the head of council or the councillor isn't the person that's going to go out with the shovel or the backhoe or whatever. It's going to be another staff person. And better off to get the information or the problem identified right to the person who can do something about it quickly, directly, and professionally. And say to them, and then look, if staff don't respond to you in a timely and appropriate fashion, let me know. And if they do a good job, let me know that too. But it's important to let me know if it doesn't come out the way you want. But otherwise, that's the quickest route to getting it done. The other thing, I talked about 24/7 and that call Saturday night. It requires, when I say total commitment, being an elected official, you are never out of the public's eye, wherever you are. If you're at a hockey rink, or if you're at a banquet, or if you're at a wedding, or something like this. Total commitment, you're totally exposed is what it is. It can consume you if you don't put some barriers and discipline on it. And say to that person on Saturday night at 10 o'clock, I'm sorry, call me Monday morning, 8 o'clock, here's my number, I'll talk to you then. But I'm with my family and we're playing a game of whatever tonight. Good night. You need to put some barriers. People need to plan their holidays to get out of town. And oh yeah, some of you may find that you have seats on not just council, but you're on something else that was appointed formerly by council. So if you're on one of the townships, you might find, or area municipalities, you find you're on county council as well as local council. Or you might be on a conservation authority as well. Or you might be on one of the local boards, library board or police services board. There's multiple seats that you might occupy during the course of your term. So if you're going to do this, you want to talk to your family, significant others, children, parents, co-workers, find out what they think about it and figure out how to deal with calls. You also have to become somewhat an expert on social media, or know how to avoid it, or be willing to avoid it, okay? I mean, there's lots of times where the best advice is don't engage. Don't even read, okay? Because some people, well, there are people called trolls, right? They'd love to get under your skin. And if they can get a reaction from you, well, then they won. So again, you need to understand social media in your community. There are other communities where, if you got anybody in this area who runs a website that's main objective is to embarrass council and people that they don't like? No? You got somebody like that? If you go to Southwestern Ontario, you look up Wingham Free Press. These are very interesting people, and comes within this close of slandering council and all of councillors and staff on a regular basis. And in fact, gets to the point where it's not worth spending the money to sue them, but it does get a following, and you have to have a thick skin, quite frankly. So you need to make sure you set aside appropriate prep time. Things to consider. If you consider yourself to be a micromanager, this probably isn't the job for you, because there's so many different things that you would be involved in, and presumably most of you have some employment or life outside of a municipal position as well. That's number one. Number two is the issue of incivility. And I think that incivility in a public forum has increased. It's really important for whoever's head of council to manage it in the council chambers, do their best and be prepared to prevent it, manage it when it occurs, because there are people who enjoy, quite frankly, being uncivil. And it's become more prevalent, that's all. And that's why the province is, we think, looking at coming in with a standardized code of conduct to assist integrity commissioners in dealing with incivility and the appropriate penalties for it. Confidentiality. When something's confidential, how long does confidentiality last? Pardon? Always, forever. Yeah. Confidential means forever, until some formal process has made it public, right? Confidential is forever. That means pillow talk doesn't count. You don't share with your spouse or your significant other the issues. You don't share with your brother or your mother or whoever. That's really important, because someone's life or someone's well-being or someone's financial position could be inappropriately affected by a breach of confidentiality, not to mention that the municipal corporation might be liable in law for a breach of confidentiality. So that's a very, very important aspect. And in terms of personal responsibilities, there's a couple of other personal responsibilities that we should talk about. And I made reference before to the Municipal Code of Conduct. This is, in the scheme of things, a relatively new addition to municipal life. Every municipality is required to have them. Every local board, every committee is required to abide by these codes of conduct. And municipalities are required to appoint integrity commissioners whose job it is to deal with complaints about the behavior of individuals where they are believed to have breached the code, and to investigate appropriately and report back to council in public as to whether or not there was a breach, and if there was a breach, what's an appropriate penalty. They also have a duty to educate council and educate the public about the code of conduct. You don't see that quite as evident, but they also provided written advice to members, should members ask for advice in writing. So these are really important and I think very, very useful. Every new council should be planning a session with its integrity commissioner almost immediately after being elected. Some members will be returning, some members will be new. I wouldn't be surprised if John's already scheduled it. That's the kind of thing staff do. The issue you run into is there are some people who serve as integrity commissioners for multiple municipalities, and it can be a little difficult orchestrating their time. But we're lucky that we have Zoom these days, or other webcast tools that allow people to participate. So that's a really, really important aspect. The other thing that an integrity commissioner deals with is the application of the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. And this is a relatively recent change where we have somebody who can actually advise members of council. Prior to recent years, the last half dozen years, if a member wondered whether or not he or she had a conflict of interest that they needed to declare and recuse themselves from voting on a matter because they had a financial interest, the act says pecuniary interest. Pecuniary is another Latin term, means financial. And there's some very specific definitions of direct and indirect. But a member can now write to the integrity commissioner, describe the circumstances, and we'll get a written opinion back. And the value of that written opinion is if for some reason an elector would take that councillor to court over not having declared a pecuniary interest, they can rely on that for a defense. And a judge will recognize that as an appropriate defense. So people now have the ability to be advised. It's not so much the defense that's important, it's the fact that people have the ability to be educated and know when to participate and not to participate in a matter because they have a financial interest in it. And if you do have a financial interest, direct or indirect, and I won't go into the definition, but your obligation is not to participate in the voting or influence the voting before, during, or after a vote taking place. So you may have a financial interest in a particular matter. You can't grab your fellow councillor at a coffee shop and say, listen, I can't vote on this, but I really want you to do so-and-so. You've just broken the law. And that's That's something that gets driven pretty hard. The number of complaints that we've seen have increased in years, and that's predominantly because the Integrity Commissioner now can deal with them. I think that's good news. Now the municipality pays for the cost of these investigations, and they can be quite significant. There are municipalities out there where the budget for last year for Integrity Commissioner services was in excess of $100,000 with investigations and advice. In my mind, it's money well spent because people should be learning from it, and it should be that it doesn't repeat over and over and over. I'll talk a little bit about confidentiality. I said something about the obligation to maintain that, and that includes written and verbal information if it's received in confidence. And your code of conduct will also speak to that. It'll describe some of the circumstances. So watch out for coffee shops, watch out for internets, and remember, if you're just a member of council, you don't speak on behalf of the municipality anyway. You speak on behalf of yourself. But again, you have that duty to maintain the confidentiality. Safe Drinking Water Act. This is a specific piece of legislation that treats elected officials differently. It treats them differently in the sense that if you, as an elected official, don't exercise your statutory role with respect to drinking water appropriately, you can be held personally liable, fined personally, and sent to jail as an individual. The municipality cannot pay your fine. There's no insurance for it, and the staff aren't going to serve your time in jail for you either, so don't even think about that. It hasn't happened since the act was passed. Why? Because people have been really, really careful about this, quite frankly. There were some situations before the act was passed where, in fact, people would have gone to jail, I think, for this. But and not just the Walkerton situation. There was a situation down in Elgin County where council didn't exercise appropriate due diligence. The Walkerton situation, you may be somewhat familiar with it. It was a cascading series of errors where there was a particularly bad storm, and the runoff covered a feedlot, and the manure runoff affected a wellhead. Now, the feedlot was fine. The wellhead was improperly designed. That was step one, okay? Then the second part of it, and I'm just cutting some corners here. The second part of it was the chlorinator at the drinking water location for the municipality was broken. Staff were not paying attention to it, weren't getting it appropriately repaired, and they just sort of, well, we'll add some more chlorine, that'll be the best thing for it, right? Not to mention the fact that these two staff had pretty strong evidence that they spent a lot of time drinking on the job as well. And in fact, I think that came out during the inquiry. The elected members who formed the three-member Public Utilities Commission, they did not take their duties seriously as well. They knew that the two brothers who ran the show weren't performing appropriately, but they'd known them for a long time, and they were pretty good guys, and things had gone okay for a long time. So what's the problem? What's the problem? It wasn't until people started to get ill in significant numbers that the medical officer of health actually was saying, there's something going on here. And the results of the testing that showed that there was E. coli in the water were no longer sent, I think, to the Ministry of the Environment. They were just sent to the Ministry of Health. So as a result, there was no cross discussion on this. Otherwise, it would have been, and that was a step that was canceled by the province from an efficiency point of view. So in effect, it was several days after the system was infected that people actually caught on to what actually was happening and worked back up the chain to find the source. I live in London, not far from University Hospital, and I couldn't figure out what the orange ambulances were going over, the helicopters going over my house on a fairly regular basis at that time of year. And these were kids coming from Walkerton to be treated there in the kidney unit. So it's quite significant. I had an opportunity I was invited to appear before the commission as an expert witness on municipal finance. And the basic evidence that I gave was this wasn't a financial problem. The municipality could afford to treat the water. They could afford to manage their facilities. Their water rates were not out of reason. It wasn't a financial problem. And it was clearly negligence in the commissioner's mind. So it's really still quite fresh in my mind. And there's still hundreds of people today that suffer as a result of that. So that's why the province has taken such a really strong view of that. So if you are elected, when reports come forward on drinking water, pay attention to them. And the figures that you expect in terms of compliance with standards and so forth, you know, if the figure is anything less than 99.9 with a really good excuse, then you need to really be concerned, have a problem. So, a couple of things that aren't on the slide. And this one is call this a booming business. Artificial intelligence. How many of you currently use artificial intelligence programs in your work or your studies or whatever? I see it. Okay, there's more than a smattering of hands go up. How many of you were using it a year ago? Same number? No, it's not as high. It's about half the number if I count. And you go back a year before that, and the number would even be smaller. It won't be long before it'll be just about everybody who's using it in some form or fashion if you're working or if you're employed. Municipal staff currently use artificial intelligence in order to help them develop their reports. That's a good thing to do. It's part of your research. And they don't necessarily provide you reports that are written by some AI program somewhere in their entirety, but it's a resource. It's a resource that can capture things from a lot more sources than we can actually look at. Anybody here ever taken a report that was provided to you as a decision maker and run it through an AI program? Yeah, we're going to find counselors who do that as a way of saying, you know, I'm not sure I fully agree with this report, and run it through an AI program to see, you know, is that consistent with best practice thinking elsewhere? I don't know, is that what you use it for? I don't know what you use it for, but.
Multiple answers sometimes. You would say, well, this is what I'm gathering from it, and you do options.
Yeah. It can add to your understanding. Yeah. And in fact, that's why staff will put it through AI as well. So we're going to find that. We're going to find citizens coming before you, appearing as delegations. Have you had a delegation come through at all? John says, I did some AI research, council, on the issue that's before you today, and this is what I got. If you haven't had that yet, it'll come. It'll come. So don't be surprised if that happens. I talked earlier about social media. If you're elected to council, it's important. You won't be elected to council without having a social media presence, right? That's an important part of campaigning. You need to understand what kind of engagement you're going to have after you're elected, if you're elected, and how you're going to exercise discipline and manage your time with respect to that. So it's a case of you use, you cope, and you ignore. You have to figure out when it's appropriate to use, to cope, and ignore. So in summary, local government involves a lot of different services and processes in order to deliver those services. It's technical, it's complex, and the processes of making decisions are quite detailed. But you have to remember that the powers, with the exception of these strong mayor powers, rest with council. And some of the most, considered the most successful councils, the strong mayor is using these powers where he or she has to use them with a very light hand. I was talking with a senior councillor from Ottawa this morning at breakfast, and he was telling me that the mayor of Ottawa, who has had strong mayor powers for the full term, uses them very rarely. And in fact, when he is obliged to use them, because the law says you must, he goes out of his way to consult with council in the same way that he would have done beforehand. So it's an extra effort to do that. So that's an important role. So there's a couple of other things. If you're going to run, you need to understand your role, the limits on it, the challenges, the expectations, and your personal obligations as well, both to your family and to the law and to your business or your employer. How does that jive into it? But most importantly, talk to your family, because your family will be impacted in ways that you hadn't expected. There will be brothers-in-law, there will be friends, there will be friends who no longer are friends because they think you have some magic power that you didn't have before to affect their lives. So you need to be sensitive to that sort of thing or anticipate it. So we're right on where I thought we'd be on schedule. If you have a question or two, come on down to the microphone. That way they'll be recorded on the tape of the meeting so that people can watch it afterwards. I think it's going to be on YouTube, and they'll be able to hear the question and the answer. So if anybody's got a question like that, I'd be more than happy to try and entertain them. We've got a few more minutes. Here we are. Sir.
Hi, Nigel. Thanks for the presentation. I just had a couple questions about strong mayor powers because this is the first municipal election with strong mayor powers. Okay. And you mentioned that under strong mayor, that the hiring and the firing of sort of senior city staff and the CAO can happen. Under the Municipal Act, in an election year, does that, I know that the Municipal Act says that you can't really hire or fire staff like that in an election year. Does strong mayor power override that?
There's something called that's a good question. There's something called lame duck provision.
Okay.
After a certain point, depending on the number of councillors that are returning, certain things kick in. I don't have the chapter and verse on that, but you can be sure that will be available to a council should those situations arise. Okay. But again, it depends in part on what percentage of the members of council could return. Okay. Okay, so it's referred to lame duck. Sometimes a certain authority is delegated to staff, okay, so that the corporation's business can be carried out if you don't have enough councillors returning or eligible to return. Say they don't run. Then you can have a problem like that. But again, it's highly specific, and highly localized. So it's a good question.
Yeah, I just also had another question under what you think municipal elections across Ontario will look like with strong mayor powers in sort of the mayoral considerations. Yeah.
Different.
Okay. Great. Awesome. That answers it. Great. Thank you.
Thank you for asking the question. I asked a couple of mayors today in a session I was conducting at this conference and said, given that the strong mayor powers initially granted didn't appear to have kick-started housing and infrastructure development right away, and Prime Minister Carney and Premier Ford have come forward with some investments and some tax reduction measures and DC development charge changes that may kickstart this. Is it time to suggest to the province that they get rid of the strong mayor power provisions before the election so that we don't have the confusion? And it was really interesting to see their responses. They weren't sure. And it was, I think they didn't want to offend the province, as a matter of fact, or the premier. Yes, sir.
So I don't understand that if one recuses himself from a vote, is that still a no vote?
No. It's, okay, let's say somebody declares a pecuniary interest
Yes.
in a 7-person council, so then there's only 6 voting. It's still it's the majority of the members eligible to vote.
Of the 6?
Forming a quorum,
eligible
yeah.
vote, so it would be 5 then?
Yeah, it would be, it will be, no, 4.
4, okay.
Okay. Smaller council, a council of, actually, the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act allows a quorum to be reduced as a result of declarations of pecuniary interest down to 2, regardless of the size of council you started with.
Okay.
Okay? So obviously in that case, those 2 members have to agree in order to pass something.
Yeah, if it's 2, then you've got, if one agrees and one doesn't agree.
Yeah, 1-1 fails.
Okay.
Tie votes are lost. But that's interesting. That situation happened down in southwestern Ontario many decades ago. There was something called it was in the village of Erio, south of Chatham, juts out near Rondo Park into Lake Erie. And there was a railway property used to run down to the coal dock right through the middle of the village. And all the properties in the village fronted on it one way or the other. And it became available for sale. And actually, every member of council owned property that fronted on that railroad allowance. So they actually had to apply to a judge at that time. But
So council, the quorum.
there is a process that allows for it if people recuse themselves. Does that help?
Thank you, yeah.
Again, depends on the situation, but, okay. So someone's either going home or coming down with a question. Yeah. Perfect, okay, there's the mic.
Thanks for the presentation, Nigel. It was great. My question is, we were talking about confidentiality, and then we talked about AI and about putting reports into AI. And we know once we put things into AI, it's no longer ours. So are there any programs that are banned? Is there any rules in place for AI in putting confidential?
That's an interesting, very interesting question. I would advise you not to put a confidential report into an AI program. How's that?
That sounds good.
Any other report that comes before council is already in the public domain.
Yeah,
Okay?
awesome. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Good catch. I like that. I like it. Anything else come forward? Going once. Twice. John, thank you very much for the invitation to be here. I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed the attention, despite the fact there's. Even with the lights in my eyes, I could actually see that you weren't sleeping. It's really good theater for that. So thank you very much. Okay. Thank you.